Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast from Byfield. We have one of our occasional but wildly popular middle-aged dad editions this week, where I'm Ben Girdlestone, Joint Managing Director here at Byfield, and I'm joined by my fellow Joint Managing Director, Michael Evans. How you doing, Michael?
I'm good, thanks. Good to do the centrist dad episode.
The dadcasts, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. We've actually got quite a bit to get through today, so we'll crack on. And we're recording this on Friday morning, just as the FT Innovative Lawyers Europe supplement hits, with obviously the awards last night. Can't pretend to have read it all line by line, but I'm always struck by what a really good piece of work and report it is. And it's been going for over 20 years now, and it really has evolved so much. And I'm always struck by they just get the blend, I think, between, the private practice and in-house community right. And there's a blend between the two. I felt that the coverage around AI particularly was fascinating. Comments from Freshfields and other firms where really firms are starting to get their heads around the fact that they need to combine the selling of traditional legal services with products, and the two things are not separate. And it's the big challenge is joining the two. I'm not sure what you think.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, two not particularly relevant points, but congratulations again to Rena, Yasmin, and everybody at RSGI for pulling it together again. I find it mildly terrifying, but I remember the first one. I'm sure you do too, Ben.
Well, I do, and I've always, probably show my age a bit, but I really used to think that supplement was great, the magazine. And it's not even a criticism, but it is quite hard to find, and unless you're looking for it on the FT site. And I always think that is a bit of a shame, but I say that every year. But I agree with you. It's it's a tremendously impressive body of work, and I share your congratulations to the team there at RSG, and also all the firms that have been ranked and mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, on the law firm, I think the AI piece, so just to go dig a bit deeper, is there's been a technology piece for years in this pretty much since it started, and I think if we looked back at a report from 10, 15 years ago and now, you would be able to see just how far the market has come in, and AI has reached the genuinely transformational stage after a few years of it being a bit performative AI chat, when they were really talking about machine learning. And the last couple of years that's really started to change, but it feels like there's been a genuine transformation going on right now, and that's reflected in the report where we're talking about law firms acting more like tech consultancies, Baker, Simmons, others, offering legal tech / AI consultancy services, not just for traditional legal advice, regulatory compliance, not just your traditional legal work, the genuinely potentially transformational impact on the legal business model around, the combination of fixed pricing and AI. And also the in-house view of corporate legal teams increasingly adopting AI. I think it's mention of several National Grid, Accenture, Lloyd's embracing AI tools to handle workloads, to improve efficiency and to change workflows. So it's not just the law firms that are driving change. Clients themselves are sort of demanding the technology and related value as part of legal services. And I think that's all becoming a lot more real and a lot more unavoidable than it was even 18 months ago, thanks to generative AI becoming something that increasingly we can't live without in our working lives or even personal lives.
Yeah, I agree. And just before we move on from this, from a communications perspective, I'm kind of struck by some of the commentary from Freshfields and others within that particular piece in the report, where it's almost like they're becoming at ease with what they're selling in terms of, the blend of products and expertise. And I'm reminded that the Big Four have been doing this for years. They understand that they sell process. They understand what they are selling. And it's not kind of, okay, I've got my, tech head on, I'm selling that, and then I've got my advisory head on and I'm selling that. It's the blend of the two. And I think some of the language about what firms are marketing whilst still looking after their brand is evolving quite a lot. And I was almost as interested in that as I was by the actual by the actual content. Sticking to the AI theme, we always do slightly try not to make our podcasts or Trump featured too heavily, but I think it's unavoidable this week with the state visit, which I think can be described as successful. But, in terms of the legal sector, that 31 billion investment guaranteed as part of what was agreed this week is significant in AI, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's whatever you think about the politics, the contrast between this state visit and the last one by Trump is notable. But the sort of investment at scale piece is important, because if we're really honest, the size of the UK economy and the relative lack of growth in the economy over the last 15 years since the financial crisis compared to the GDP growth of America means that we don't have scale to invest in ourselves by ourselves. And, Brexit further removed that ability to invest at scale by making us, no more than the sum of our parts as such, the UK economy just being alone as such. So and AI requires investment at scale, and partnering with the US, if we're not going to do anything with the EU, which is pretty much off the table, is something which is absolutely necessary, because we cannot invest at the scale required ourselves. The government can put in a few hundred million here and there, but it can't put in tens of billions because we don't have the money. We just don't. So I think if it is brought to life, it will be a very, very good thing, and it's a necessary thing. So absolutely. But as some of the lawyers who commented to I think the head of tech at Taylor Wessing, called the deal a potential game changer, and I think that gets used a lot, that term, but I think in this case it's genuinely true.
Yeah, and I think that people that are really interesting in all this are people like the CMA, and other regulatory bodies. I mean, they are quite a tricky situation, aren't they? Because behind the scenes on this deal would be like, come on, UK, make things a bit easier for us with big tech companies. So, I always feel a little bit for for people like the CMA, because on one hand, they're expected to be the kind of guardians of good practice and fairness and all that sort of stuff. Yet they have a lot of power to kind of kickstart bits of the economy or not, depending on which deals they let through or whatever else they do. So they're a bit like between the devil and the deep blue sea, aren't they? And I think if I was the head of the CMA, or if I was, another regulator, I'd be thinking, boy, I can have my work cut out over the next few years. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right, because there are battle lines, and there are things which are contentious where, like many things, whether it's food regulations or whether it's the approach to AI and online safety, there are or data protection, there are big divergences there are much bigger differences between the US and the UK than there are between the UK and the EU, because of the legacy of being in the EU. And to make those compromises around things like NHS data, and Online Safety Act, etc., which America US business sees as complete overreach. It's going to be hard to get the alignment required to make this deal work without some significant compromises. And let's face it, we are the junior partner, as we always are in any kind of dealings with America. And so it's a question of, are we willing to make sufficient compromises to make it work? And if not, then it probably won't go very far. But that's a tough one.
I agree. I was struck by how good Trump was this week, actually, in terms of his sort of diplomatic skills. He was saying the right thing at the right time and all that sort of stuff, which was quietly pleasing. I don't know if you've heard the footage of him on the plane when he's being less than complimentary about the London mayor. describing him and what he's done in probably terms you can imagine. But it seemed to be successful, and given the rather parlous state of the economy, I think it's probably quite a good week, and probably a good week for the legal community as well. So we're going to move on now to talk about law firm strategies. So Mishcon de Reya, who are always a firm who kind of get their brand and are seen to be pretty on the money with this stuff, have launched Vision in capitals, capital V 2030, with a sharper focus on 3 core sectors alongside disputes, international growth and operational transformation. And those sectors are innovation economy, private wealth and private capital. Now, I don't really intend to go too deep into Mishcon. It's not a firm I know particularly well, but I'm always struck when I read law firms' strategic pronouncements. And my first thing I always do is I read them and think, what are they committing to here? Are they creating a rod for their own backs? And are they actually going to achieve what they're going to achieve? And reading this, I think it's perfectly sensible and realistic. But obviously, when numbers start to come in, and we have talked about this quite a bit, you might end up in kind of slightly rocky territory. What do you think, Michael? What's your view on Mishcons and general big pronouncements of targets, etc., and visions and strategies and things?
I mean, having visions can work for people, but it can also be the sign of a serious health disorder. Let's face it. Look, I thought the Mishcons one was absolutely very sensible. You need to be able to have a strategy, and you need to be able to articulate it, and you need your people to be able to understand it and to be able to get on board with it, because all you have are people, and if your people don't understand your strategy, you might as well not have one. They've got to understand it, they've got to be on board with it, and they've got to know what it means for them and how they can contribute to it. If you don't have those things, you've just got a document that says things, and none of it means anything because none of it will actually come to pass. So as long as you have something which is socialized properly internally, that you've consulted on properly and hasn't been cooked up by 3 people in the back room without actually thinking about what's achievable and what they can get their people to do, then you're in a good place. I thought Mishcon's one, it looked nothing controversial there. Stronger focus on a few key sectors. Keeping that heritage around disputes as being a very, very big part of who they are, and international expansion being important. They're all things that I would think people can get on board with. The things that I find more challenging are when leaders make themselves hostage to fortune by putting out really big numbers, whether that's in terms of like the size of the firm, in terms of scale, or whether it's financial targets. Saying you're going to double in 3 years or 5 years, or triple your revenues or whatever, or grow your profits by 50% is a difficult thing to achieve. It's much better to have a stated aim, which might be to target, to join a particular group or to lead a market segment. That's absolutely fine. But the sort of, we're going to be a $2 billion firm by 2029. And if you're a $1 billion firm, that gives you a few years, and you're only going to deliver that if you do a merger, and you're making yourself absolute hostage to fortune. And I just don't understand why you would do that. But I thought the Mishcon's one was perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree. And to the other extreme, it's like we've rejigged our website a bit and tweaked our org chart. That's our new strategy. That tends to happen. I'm always very more fascinated around firms and sectors and how many they're trying to target. I always remember years ago reading that Deloitte was going to restructure its business around 14 key sectors. 14. It's quite a lot. And I think there is an absolute balance there. So I think the rest of the podcast, we're going to move our attention stateside. I know that you wanted to say something around Charlie Kirk and the tragedy this week, and what tangentially it might mean for the legal sector.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's an awful, political violence is always awful, and it doesn't matter if you agree with somebody or not. Who deserves to be shot him in the neck for expressing their political views, and I don't think that's controversial. At the same time, what it's done is put the you know the difficulties around the schism in the US right back into the spotlight. And freedom of speech issues, because people naturally will have opinions on events, and people will express those opinions. And it is, at what point do personal opinions reflect badly on the firm? And yet there's a painful irony in that you have somebody who was a free speech advocate and supported by many free speech advocates who was killed, and then you have almost a clampdown on free speech following that, and also some kind of glorifications of political violence as well. So you can sort of see it from all sides, and it just it really underlines the difficulty in finding the right line for businesses. And law firms are people businesses with a lot of people who have opinions and have social media presences. And when is something a sackable offense? When is something, and how do you have appropriate rules and policies to manage this in a way which is professional, keeps the business safe, makes it clear to people what the rules are, but without going too far and stepping on their right to have opinions. And I just think it's really underlined the difficulties in the current time in this environment for businesses more broadly, but including law firms. What do you think, Ben?
I've got quite a commercial view on this, and I think we get asked this a lot, don't we, by clients and other people we know. It's really hard, and I massively agree with you that law firms are people businesses. It's not like you work for ICI or something. It's much harder to disassociate the individual from their place of work when in professional services, and I think there has to be some common sense on both sides. I mean, when I was at Stalter May, I think that's probably still the case, but in totality, all the government work the firm does, the government is its biggest client. If you combine the Home Office, the Foreign Office, and all that sort of stuff, when I was there was obviously things that the Tory government did, which I was quite unhappy with. But I knew that if I posted something, even on Facebook about that, definitely on LinkedIn and Twitter, because it was a bit more sensible then, it would have reflected on my firm, and I decided to keep my counsel. And I think trying to get some structure and some rules around this stuff is really, really difficult, because a lot of it is around feel. I think a lot of it is around feel. If something is okay and if something is not, and it's quite hard to get parameters around it. Clearly, talking about people that are shot is not a thing to do. But there's much less emotive subjects, which are, I think, slightly more grey areas and things. And one thing is certainly true. If you rewound whatever, even 10 years. For most people would tend to acquiesce to what I'm saying in terms of, okay, I get it, I work for a big firm, I can't really say too much. Now it's the other way. People are like, well, I'm an individual first, and where I work is secondary, and I can disassociate the two. It's quite a tough one.
Yeah, and it is,
yeah.
But people need to be able to express opinions, but there is a limit to what is acceptable to express, and that's kind of always been the case. It's just that it's so much harder right now, and America, like many things, is the kind of focal point for all of this.
Absolutely. Talking of the States, you've neatly moved us into our...
You see what I did there?
Very, very good. Yeah, sharp on a Friday morning. I'm off to the States next Friday. I'm seeing clients and contacts in DC and New York, but I'm also going to Boston, where I've never been before, for a little bit of a long weekend before I start work, which I'm very, very excited by. But I think one of the things that's really, really interesting at the moment is all the Trump stuff, for want of a better expression, that we were completely dominated everything in the summer and the late spring. Seems from in the UK media, legal media, to have almost disappeared now. It feels like it's done and dusted. If you look at the coverage of the Trump visit this week, there was obviously a great piece of analysis in The Lawyer around the 31 billion investment, which we talked about. Lots of really good views from people, etc. But no one was talking about executive orders and everything else. However, talking to US clients, of which people know we've got many, it's absolutely still the number one topic there, about how it's all going to play out. And it's going to be very interesting when I'm there to get the mood music, and I'll certainly talk about it when I come back. But it certainly feels like, things have moved on here in terms of the minds of journalists and opinion formers, but all the executive orders, the deals, and all that is very, very far from playing out in the States. And I think you picked out an interesting story around Arnold and Porter this week to finish off.
Yeah, just in that vein, when I completely agree that it's not going away. I don't think it's a live day-to-day reputational issue in the way that you would have, weekly calls and crisis teams that like a lot of the larger US firms had when the executive orders were first being announced. It's not that. It's more that it's like permeating decision making and permeating the environment, and it's a lens through which law firms have to make decisions now. And I'd be really interested to hear what people say about that kind of climate. And if it is a climate of, is it a climate of fear? Is it a climate of just a new era of having to think about things differently? I mean, I'll be really interested to hear what you find out, Ben. But the Arnold and Porter story, it's sort of emblematic of some things. It's just a story about them being appointed to advise Brazil on a potential challenge or an actual challenge, I'm not sure which, to the 50% tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. And it's just kind of astonishing to think that there's a whole group of the world's biggest law firms that couldn't really take that mandate on anymore, or there would be questions. And for the firms that did deals with the Trump administration, could they take that on? And the answer is quite possibly no, or they wouldn't be wanted by the client to take that on. And I think if you rewind 10 months or so, or less than that, 10 months. And if somebody said that you'd be in a situation where on really large disputes in opposition to the federal government, you would have many of the top 10 law firms in the world that might be conflicted or couldn't really take on that work in opposition to federal government. And, that is objectively astonishing when you think about it.
I agree. And I also think that as a litigator, the ability to fight has to be your number one asset, right? In terms of your personal brand, your ability to go into battle. And if you're kind of like, oh, I don't know, then it's slightly tricky, isn't it? I agree. And I refer again to a couple of comments I heard last time I was in the States from leaders of big firms saying, well, you know what? The ability of big firms to take on big litigation mandates may wane in time, and I think that's exactly what you're saying. And we've talked a lot in the podcast about the rise of boutiques here and in the States, litigation boutiques. We've seen people leave Paul Weiss and other firms to go set things up on their own, and you really do wonder, don't you?
Yep. All right.
Good. I think that's a wrap. So have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening, and see you on the other side.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.